The estate had a new manager. This was the fact that reorganized everything else: the staff rotations, the meal timings, the particular silence that fell over the eastern corridor whenever footsteps came from the administrative wing. Vikram Sood had arrived on a Tuesday, which the older staff considered a bad omen, though none of them said so where it could be logged. He was 34. He carried a briefcase that looked like it had been bought specifically for this appointment. He shook hands with everyone who had a title and nodded at everyone who didn't. The household absorbed him the way old stone absorbs weather, visibly at first, then not at all. By Thursday, the kitchen staff had adjusted their morning schedule by 20 minutes to accommodate his preference for early tea. By Friday, the two junior groundskeepers had taken to tucking in their shirts when they heard his shoes on the gravel. By Saturday, the archivist, Priya Naidu, 51 years old, 23 years in service to the estate's records and correspondence, had begun keeping a second notepad, one for the official log, one for the other kind. Ratan had not adjusted anything. He was at the grounds by 5:15, same as always. The eastern beds first, then the courtyard fountain, then the long border hedge that ran from the staff quarters to the old boundary wall. The fig tree last, always the fig tree last, with the remaining water from the clay pot he carried on his left shoulder because 30 years of carrying it had curved that shoulder into the shape of the task. He was 58. He had been on this estate since he was 24, which meant he had outlasted two managers, one brief administrative dissolution following a government audit, a monsoon that took the eastern wall, and the Maharaja's eldest son's 3-year attempt to modernize the estate into something that could be photographed for a travel magazine. None of these things had moved the schedule. Vikram walked the grounds on his third day. Clipboard pressed Kurta, the particular stride of a man measuring what he intended to change. He stopped near the fig tree and watched Ratan pour the last of the water at its base. Even distribution. No hurry. "How long has this tree been here?" Vikram asked. Ratan looked up. "Before me," he said. Vikram made a note. Ratan picked up his clay pot and walked back toward the staff quarters without adjusting his pace. Priya, watching from the records room window, wrote 2 words in her second notepad. "He knows." She wasn't sure yet what Ratan knew. She wasn't sure it mattered. What mattered was that the knowing was already there, already settled, already older than Vikram's briefcase by several decades. She had learned, in 23 years of working with documents that recorded what people officially were versus what they actually did, that the most dangerous person in any room was never the one who announced themselves. She turned back to the files. Outside, Ratan set his clay pot on the stone step and sat beside it. Same step, same time. The tea would arrive in 4 minutes because it always arrived in 4 minutes because he had been sitting on this step at this time for 34 years, and the kitchen knew it the way the grounds knew the water. He drank it slowly, looking at nothing in particular. Vikram's footsteps crossed the gravel somewhere behind him. Ratan did not turn around. Mira had been working in the records room since March. She was 19. She had her father's steadiness and her mother's handwriting precise, slightly forward-leaning, the kind that fills a ledger without wasting a millimeter. The senior archivist had requested her specifically after watching her reorganize the household's correspondence backlog in 11 days, a task the previous assistant had been working on intermittently for 4 months. She learned fast. She asked questions that were always the right questions. She did not fill silences with noise. Priya had, in 23 years, trained 4 assistants. Mira was the only one she had not needed to untrain first. Vikram noticed her in the second week. It was not dramatic. It was the particular quality of attention that Priya had cataloged before, the way certain men in certain positions noticed the people least likely to report them. He stopped in the records room doorway on a Wednesday, asked Mira a question about the land survey files that he could have asked Priya. Mira answered it correctly. He thanked her. He left. He came back on Friday. This time it was a request. Could Mira assist with cross-referencing the new administrative intake files against the estate's existing residential documentation? It was detailed work, he said. It would be easier after hours, when the room was quiet. Priya was present for the request. She answered before Mira could. I can assign that to the morning schedule, she said. We work better with the full staff in. Vikram smiled. Of course, he said, whenever it's convenient. He left. Mira looked at her file and said nothing. That evening, Priya stayed late. She was not certain she was staying late because of Vikram. She told herself it was the quarterly correspondence audit. She was a precise woman. She did not lie to herself for long. 3 days later, Vikram made the same request again, slightly differently worded, with a government mandate number attached, which gave it the texture of an order rather than a preference. Priya processed the paperwork. She approved the session. She had no formal grounds to refuse. She told Mira before she left that evening, "You close the outer door from inside," she said. "The bolt is on the right." Mira nodded. She already knew about the bolt. She had already started using it. What changed, what Priya noticed and logged in her second notepad without nomming it precisely, was Ratan. He had never come to the records room before. It was not his part of the estate. His work was outside, the grounds, the water, the old boundary hedge that needed cutting every 6 weeks exactly, or it grew into the path. But he began appearing at the far end of the eastern corridor at 7 in the evening. Not entering, not calling, just present at the corridor's end, clay pot set down beside him, sitting on the floor with his back against the stone wall the way men sit when they have decided to wait as long as waiting takes. The first evening Priya saw him there, she thought it was coincidence. She was not a woman who believed in coincidence for long. By the third evening she understood. He was not watching the door. He was occupying the corridor. There was a difference. Watching could be argued away. Occupying, a man with 34 years on the estate, sitting where he had every right to sit, could not be asked to move without the asking itself becoming a record. Vikram walked past him twice. Both times he nodded. Ratan nodded back. Neither of them said anything. Priya wrote in her second notepad, "The corridor is not empty at 7. It has not been empty since the requests began. Note the pattern. Note that it has not been acknowledged by either party. Note that this is the point." Savitri Rao was 71 years old and had been the Maharani's personal secretary since the Maharani was 32 and Savitri was 34, and the estate had been a fully functioning royal household with a staff of 60. Now the Maharani was 87, the staff was 19, and Savitri still arrived at her desk at 8 in the morning and left at 5 in the afternoon, and treated every piece of correspondence that passed through her hands as if it would be read by someone who mattered. Mira went to her on a Thursday. She sat in the chair across from Savitri's desk, the narrow wooden chair with no armrests, designed by some long-dead administrator to make visitors feel the brevity of their welcome. And she described, quietly and in order, what the requests had been, how often they had come, what Vikram had said during the after-hours sessions, and where his hands had gone when the door was closed. She used plain language. She did not embroider it. Savitri listened with her hands folded on the desk. She nodded 3 times during the account. When Mira finished, Savitri said, "I will look into it." Mira thanked her and left. Priya, who had accompanied Mira to the door of Savitri's office and waited in the outer corridor, watched Mira's face as she came out. It was not the face of someone who believed they had been helped. It was the face of someone who had completed a required step. 2 weeks passed. Vikram's requests continued. The session schedule shifted, now framed as a formal administrative initiative, now carrying 2 government reference numbers, now copied to the estate's legal correspondent. The paperwork had grown thicker, which is what paperwork does when someone wants a thing to look necessary. Savitri filed nothing. Priya understood why without needing it explained. Savitri was not a cruel woman. She was an institutional woman, which is different and in some ways worse, because cruelty at least knows what it is. Savitri had survived 6 decades in a household built on hierarchy by understanding precisely and at all times the cost of disturbing the hierarchy. Vikram had government backing. Vikram had a mandate. Vikram had reference numbers. Meera had a complaint. These were not the same weight. Savitri's scale was very old and very accurate. That evening, Priya sat at her desk after everyone had gone. She opened her second notepad. She wrote for a long time. Not the events, she had those. What she was working out was the geometry of it. Who could move, in which direction, how far, and what would remain standing after. At the end of what she wrote, she drew a line. Below it, she wrote one word, Rattan. Then she closed the notepad and went home. The decree arrived on a Monday. It came in a government envelope with 3 seals and a covering letter written in the particular bureaucratic Sanskrit that translates, in plain language, to: "This has already been decided. This meeting is a courtesy. Your questions are noted and will not change the answer." Vikram called the staff assembly for the following morning. The large inner courtyard, chairs arranged in a curve, a table at the front with the document on it. He stood behind the table in a freshly pressed kurta and read the decree in full, which took 11 minutes, because the decree was written by people who believed that length and authority were the same thing. The substance of it: all non-titled residential staff occupying a state-provided quarters must vacate within 90 days. State Land Consolidation Initiative. Transition support available. Housing references to be provided upon request. He read it without inflection. He paused after the important words in the way that people pause who want to seem reluctant about what they're delivering. The staff absorbed it in different ways. The kitchen workers looked at each other. The junior groundskeepers looked at their shoes. The household cleaner, Durga, who had been on the estate for 11 years and had 3 children in the local school, made a sound at the back of her throat that was not quite a word. Rattan sat in the last row. He had arrived exactly on time, which for him meant 3 minutes early. He sat with his hands on his knees and his back straight in the way of a man accustomed to physical work, not rigid, just present. He did not look at the document on the table. He did not look at Vikram. He looked at the fig tree, visible through the courtyard arch, because it was there and he had been looking at it for 34 years, and this was not the thing that would change that. Vikram concluded the reading. He folded the decree with care. He looked up at the assembled staff with the expression of a man who had practiced sympathy in a mirror. "I understand this is difficult news," he said. "Please know that the transition process will be managed with full respect for your years of service." His eyes moved to Meera. Not long, not obvious, just long enough. Meera's hands were still in her lap. She was sitting beside Priya. Priya was writing in her first notepad, the official one, because the assembly was a formal proceeding, and formal proceedings required documentation. In her peripheral vision, she watched Meera's hands. Still. Too still. The stillness of someone who has just understood the full architecture of a situation they had only seen the entrance to before. Vikram's look had lasted less than 2 seconds. It had said, "You need housing references now." It had said, "I provide housing references." It had said, "This is what leverage looks like when it has government seals on it." Rattan in the last row did not look at Vikram. He looked at the fig tree. His hands on his knees did not move. The assembly dispersed. Priya watched Rattan walk back toward the grounds. Same pace. Same slight forward lean from 34 years of carrying the clay pot on his left shoulder. He paused at the courtyard arch, looked at the fig tree for a moment, not dramatically, just the way a man looks at something he has been tending for longer than most marriages last, and then continued on. She wrote in her second notepad that evening. He did not react to the decree. I do not think this is because he does not understand it. I think it is because he understood something about it before it arrived. Vikram came to Rattan's quarters on a Wednesday. He framed it as a welfare visit, transition support, as promised. He brought a junior staffer with him, a young man named Ashok who was new enough to the estate not to know what the visit meant, and experienced enough with Vikram to keep his face neutral regardless. Rattan's quarters were in the old staff residential block, 3 rooms, a narrow outer courtyard, a wall with a neem tree growing against it that had cracked the lower stones in a way that the estate had been meaning to fix for a decade. The rooms were clean in the way of spaces where nothing is owned frivolously. A rope cot, a steel trunk, a shelf with a small photograph, a clay lamp, a folded shawl. Priya had been asked that morning to join the visit as an administrative witness. She stood near the outer door and wrote in her first notepad, official record, present parties, time of visit, nature of stated purpose. In her pocket, her second notepad. Vikram sat in the chair Rattan offered him. He spoke warmly. He said that Rattan's service had been exceptional and that the estate would of course provide the strongest possible references. He said that the government transition program had identified several housing options in the district. He said that the 90-day window was generous and that his office would help with every step. Rattan listened. He offered Vikram water, which Vikram accepted. He refilled the glass when it was empty. Then Vikram said casually, as if it were an afterthought, "Your daughter has settled in well here. She's sharp. I'll make sure her reference letter reflects that. She'll need it given the housing situation. She may want to look at options outside the estate. Fresh start." He paused. "She shouldn't have any trouble, as long as the transition goes smoothly." Rattan said nothing. Vikram continued. He gestured vaguely at the room. "You've made this space very comfortable," he said. "I noticed that photograph is that from your family village, the one behind the shelf." Priya's pen stopped. The photograph on the shelf was not behind the shelf. It was on the shelf, flush against the wall, visible from the doorway if the inner door was open. The inner door had been closed when they arrived. Rattan had opened it when they entered. To see the photograph, to know its position relative to the shelf, to know it was behind rather than simply on, you would have needed to be in this room before, with the inner door open, when Rattan was not here. Rattan looked at Vikram, not with alarm, not with anger, with the particular quality of attention that Priya had only seen in people who have been waiting for a confirmation and have just received it. "It is my father," Rattan said. "He worked on this estate before me." Vikram nodded, smiled, stood. He thanked Rattan for the water. He told Ashok they were finished. He walked to the door. At the doorway he turned. "We'll be in touch about the paperwork," he said. 90 days goes quickly." He left, Ashok followed. The outer courtyard went quiet. Priya did not write in her first notepad. She stood at the door and looked at Rattan. He was looking at the photograph. His expression had not changed in any way she could name, but something in the room had shifted, the temperature of it, the quality of its silence. The way a room shifts when the thing everyone has been waiting to happen has finally, quietly happened. "Rattan," she said. He looked at her. "The photograph," she said. "He's been in this room." Rattan nodded. "Once." "How many times?" He looked at the floor near the inner door, then at the steel trunk, then at the shelf. He was reading the room the way she read documents, for what had been moved, what had been returned to almost the right position, what had been touched by someone who didn't know the original order. "Enough times to know where things are," he said. Priya wrote in her second notepad, in the outer courtyard, with her back against the neem tree. "He has been in this room. He has been in it more than once. He has been in it with purpose. The purpose connects to Mira. The photograph detail was not accidental, it was a demonstration. He wanted Rattan to know that he had been here. He wanted Rattan to feel the size of what he could do." Ratan felt it. He filed it differently than Vikram expected. She stopped writing. She looked up at the neem tree. Then she went back inside. The fig tree was still in shade when she found him there that evening. It was not a planned meeting. She had walked the outer grounds after dinner because the second notepad was full, and she needed to think without writing, which for her was the harder of the two. Ratan was at the base of the tree with his back against its trunk, and his eyes on the far boundary wall the way he looked at things when he was not looking at them. She sat on the low stone ridge beside him. Neither of them spoke for a while. The estate settled into its evening sounds, the kitchen drain, a ceiling fan somewhere in the residential block, a bird in the old neem tree that had never learned to call at appropriate hours. Ratan spoke first. "My father worked this estate," he said, "before me." "I know," Priya said. "He came in 1942, from Barmer. He was hired for the grounds, same work I do. He stayed." Priya waited. "In 1947, Ratan said, when everything was being settled, the titles, the lands, the rights, the old Maharaja was documenting the estate's obligations. Staff who had served more than 5 years, their quarters, their right to them." He paused. The Maharaja was a particular man. He believed in writing things in a way that did not need to be revisited. "Residential rights," Priya said. "In perpetuity," Ratan said. "My father's name, witnessed by the archivist at the time, Gopala Rao, your predecessor, twice over, thumbprint here." He pressed his right thumb against his left palm. "Government sealed, estate sealed, registered with the district land office." Priya was quiet for a moment. "Where is it?" she asked. Ratan looked at her. "Under the floor," he said, "in the room Vikram described." The fig tree moved slightly in the evening air. Priya understood then the full shape of it. Not the document alone. Documents could be challenged, delayed, contested by men with briefcases and government reference numbers. But the combination, a document from 1947, predating the current land consolidation initiative by 77 years, registered with the district office, executed by a Maharaja whose land grants had been specifically preserved under the estate's post-independence legal charter. Vikram's evacuation order was not just wrong. It had no jurisdiction. "Why didn't you bring this forward when the decree was announced?" she asked. Ratan picked up a small stone from the ground, turned it in his hand, set it down. "Because," he said, "I needed to know what else he wanted. The decree was paperwork. Paperwork can be paperwork." He paused. "But he came to my room. He mentioned Mira's references. He told me without telling me that he had been in my house. He set the stone down precisely where he'd found it. Now I know what he wanted. Now the document means the right thing." Priya looked at him for a long moment. "You've known about this document for how long?" she said. 31 years, he said. "My father showed me when I joined the estate. He said, keep it where you keep the things you do not need until you need them completely." The bird in the neem tree called again. Still the wrong hour, still not adjusting. Priya stood, brushed the dust from her sari, looked down at Ratan. "I'll need to see it tonight," she said. Ratan nodded. He stood, unhurried, and walked toward the staff quarters. She followed. The document was in a flat tin box. The tin was wrapped in an old cotton cloth, the kind used for straining water, now stiff with age, and the box was set into a shallow recess beneath the stone floor tile nearest the inner wall. The tile looked like every other tile. Ratan lifted it without searching for it, which told Priya everything about how long the habit had been maintained. He handed her the tin. She opened it at the table under the window light. The paper was old but not fragile. Stored dry, stored flat, stored by someone who understood that a document's survival was not passive. It required decisions, repeated over decades to keep it from the damp in the fold. The language was formal, the ink still dark. The Maharaja's personal seal in red. The district land office stamp in blue. Gopala Rao's signature, Priya's predecessor twice over, in a hand she recognized from the estate's oldest correspondence files. And at the bottom in the right-hand corner, a thumbprint in black ink. Beside it, in someone else's hand, the witnessing archivist's hand, the words, Balaram, son of Dana, groundskeeper in service since 1942. Residential rights granted in perpetuity to Balaram and his direct descendants in service. Direct descendants in service. Ratan Mira. Priya set the document down. She pressed her palms flat on the table. She looked at it for a long time without speaking, the way she looked at records when she was making sure she was reading what was actually there and not what she expected. "This has never been contested," she said. "No one knew to contest it," Ratan said. "The managers before Vikram were estate men. They knew the old arrangements. This was not relevant to them." He paused. Vikram came from outside. She looked up at him. "He didn't look in the records room," she said. "He would have found the original registration." "He looked for other things in the records room," Ratan said. The room was quiet. Priya picked up the document with both hands. She carried it to her bag. She wrapped it in the papers she always carried for transport. She fastened the bag. "I'll take this to Harbhajan tonight," she said. Harbhajan Singh, the estate's legal correspondent, 70 years old, semi-retired, cantankerous about everything except the accuracy of documents. He'll verify the district registration by morning. By afternoon, we'll have a formal legal notice. Ratan nodded. "You don't want to be in the room when it's presented," she said. It was not a question. "No," he said. "Good." She moved toward the door, then she stopped. "Vikram will know it came from you." "Yes," Ratan said. "That doesn't concern you." Ratan looked at the floor where the tile sat, replaced precisely, indistinguishable from the others. "He came into my house," he said. "He stood in my daughter's workplace. He used a government paper to tell her she needed him. He picked up his clay pot from the corner, habit, not purpose, the pot going where his hand went at the end of the evening. He should have checked the records room more carefully." Priya left. The night air outside was still warm, the kind of warm that Jodhpur kept long after the sun had finished with it. She walked quickly. She did not run. Running would have made it feel uncertain, and she was, for the first time in this entire sequence of events, completely certain. Harbhajan answered his door in his reading glasses with a book still in his hand, and the particular expression of a man who had been interrupted mid-sentence, and was deciding whether the interruption was worth the sentence. She held up the document. He looked at it, he looked at her. He opened the door wider. They sat at his table until midnight. By morning, he had the district records confirmed by phone with a contact at the land office who owed him a favor that was older than Vikram's briefcase by 20 years. By 9 o'clock, Harbhajan had drafted the formal legal notice. By 11 o'clock, it had been delivered to the estate's administrative office addressed to Vikram Sood, CC'd to the State Land Consolidation Authority, CC'd to the estate's primary legal trustee. The notice was 4 pages. The substance of it: the evacuation decree did not apply to the residential quarters occupied by Ratan, groundskeeper, or his daughter Mira, as their rights predated the current authority's jurisdiction by 7 decades and were registered with the district land office under a grant that had never been dissolved, contested, or expired. Vikram read it at his desk. Priya was not in the room. She had chosen not to be. She was in the records room with Mira, working on the quarterly correspondence audit, doing the work that did not stop for decrees or tin boxes or men who had miscalculated the age of the things beneath other people's floors. She heard through the wall the sound of a chair moving, then silence, then after a while, footsteps going toward the administrative wing. She said nothing to Mira. At 2 in the afternoon, the estate's legal trustee, a woman named Devika Rao, no relation to Savitri, who had managed the estate's legal interests from a Jodhpur city office for 15 years, arrived in person. This was notable. Devika did not arrive in person for routine matters. She met with Vikram for 40 minutes with the door closed. She met with Priya for 10 minutes with the door open. She met with Ratan at the fig tree, which was where he was, because it was the time of day he was at the fig tree. And Devika Rao was a woman who went to where things were rather than summoning them to where she was. Priya watched from the records room window. She could not hear the conversation. She saw Devika hold out her hand. She saw Ratan look at it for a moment, not with suspicion, just with the assessment of a man who had learned to read things carefully and then take it. That evening, the formal suspension notice was delivered to Vikram's office. Pending conduct review. Access to after-hours administrative sessions rescinded. Supervision of junior staff restricted to group settings with senior staff present. It was not a dismissal. It was structured like one. The language was careful, procedural, the kind that left no room for reframing because it contained no emotion to reframe, just clauses, just the geometry of what was permitted and what was no longer permitted and what happened to the gap in between. Vikram did not make a scene. He was too careful for scenes. He was the kind of man who understood when the walls came in, that loudness only confirmed the enclosure. He filed a response through proper channels. He requested a review. He used language like misunderstanding and context and procedural overreach. The review was scheduled. It took place 6 weeks later. Priya submitted her second notepad, all of it, typed and formatted, dates and times and the precise wording of what had been said in which room, including the detail about the photograph and the position of the shelf. Meera submitted a written account. Devika submitted the legal notice and its district confirmation. The review board took 3 days. Vikram left the estate on a Friday. He carried his briefcase. He did not say goodbye to the staff because the staff was not in the same corridor he used to leave. He walked out through the administrative wing's side exit, which opened onto the outer road, and that road went toward the city, and the city was not the estate. The outer gate closed. Priya logged it in her first notepad. Time, date, nature of departure. She did not log anything else about it because the first notepad was for official records and official records did not require her to note that she felt, for the first time in several months, that the weight of the building was distributed correctly again. She closed the notepad. She went back to work. 3 weeks later, the estate had not visibly changed. The administrative restructuring had produced a new interim manager, a quiet woman named Sunita, sent from the same government office, but carrying a different kind of briefcase, the worn kind, which Priya considered a better sign. The staff schedules had returned to their original timings. The kitchen had stopped adjusting the morning tea. Savitri Rao had retired. This had been announced as her own decision, which Priya suspected was accurate in the technical sense and incomplete in every other sense. Savitri had sent a note to Priya that said, "You did what I should have done. I know that. The knowing is its own consequence." Priya had filed the note in her second notepad, which she had started a new volume of, because the first volume was now part of the official record, and the second volume of the second notepad was for the things that mattered differently. She was at the records room window at 7 in the morning when she saw Ratan at the fig tree. He was watering it, clay pot left shoulder, even distribution, no hurry. He had been at the eastern beds first, then the courtyard fountain, then the long border hedge. The fig tree was last because it was always last. He had been doing this since he was 24 years old and nothing had changed that, not the decree, not the tin box, not the 6 weeks of review board proceedings, not the Friday when a briefcase went through the side exit and out onto the road. Meera came out of the staff quarters with his tea. She was in her work clothes. She had moved to a formal archivist role, after Devika had spoken to Sunita, who had spoken to the estate trustee. And the role came with different hours and a title and a salary that was not dependent on anyone's goodwill or references. She carried the tea in the clay cup because the clay cup was his, and the tea was at this time because it was always at this time. She handed it to him. He took it. They stood at the fig tree together for a moment. Then Mira said something to him. Priya could not hear it from the window. She watched Rattan's face. He looked at his daughter with the expression of a man who has been waiting a very long time for a particular day and has found, now that the day has arrived, that it looks exactly the way he expected. He answered her. 4 words. Priya could not hear them either, but she had spent 23 years reading meaning from things that did not announce themselves, and she was reasonably certain, watching Mira's face after those 4 words, that what he had said was something close to, "It was always yours." Or perhaps I kept it safe. Or perhaps it was something she didn't have the language for yet, the kind of thing that passes between a father and a daughter when the ground beneath them has been proven to belong to them, and the proving of it required no anger and no spectacle and no moment that could be filmed or applauded. Only a tin box, a thumb print from 1947, and the particular stubbornness of a man who understood that some things are protected not by confrontation, but by the refusal to be moved. Mira went back inside. Rattan drank his tea. Same step, same time. Clay cup warm against his palms. The fig tree behind him, before him in every sense that mattered, before the decree, before Vikram, before the briefcase and the government seals and the man who had stood in his room and touched his things, and believed that touching them gave him a claim on them. The morning opened around him the way mornings do on the Jodhpur plain, wide, amber, unhurried, older than every institution that has ever tried to administer it. Priya turned from the window. She opened her second notepad, the new volume. She wrote, "Nothing has changed. That is the entire point. He was always going to be here. He knew it. The document only made it legible to the people who required documents." She paused. Then she wrote one more line. "Power that announces itself loudly is rarely the power that holds." She closed the notepad. Outside, Rattan set down his empty cup. He picked up his clay pot. He walked back toward the eastern beds.